On July 3rd, the night before my 70th birthday, my daughter-in-law stood in the hallway holding two folded blankets and a pillow and said, "We just need the guest room tonight, just for one night." "The garage is clean," I looked at her, then at my son behind her, who didn't say a word, not even a shrug, just adjusted his watch, looked at the floor. The way you do when you've already decided something and now you're just waiting for the other person to get on with accepting it. I'm Mary Carson, 70 years old, and that was the moment I knew, not suspected, not feared, not hoped against, knew they had quietly, finally let me go. Subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Just nodded, took the blankets, and walked through the kitchen past the vase of sunflowers I had bought for myself that morning and stepped into the garage. It smelled like storage and old cardboard. They had cleared a corner, put down one of those thin camping mattresses. My grandson's old tricycle was next to it. Pink plastic handlebar grips fraying at the ends, a cracked box labelled Christmas. Stuff sat nearby with the lid half open, and inside I could see the little ceramic angel I used to put on their mantel. I lay down, arms crossed over my chest like I was waiting for burial, and stared at the single, dangling light bulb above me. Outside, I could hear laughter through the walls, wine glasses clinking, the rustle of gift wrap. My birthday was technically still 4 hours away, and I already knew how it would begin. That night was the first time I ever used the word erased to describe myself, not abandoned, not rejected, erased, because it wasn't rage or cruelty that brought me to that floor. It was something colder. They just didn't see me anymore. I was something to work around, a logistical problem, a body that needed somewhere to be placed, and they chose the garage. I used to think there would be a final argument, a slammed door, some harsh word that would explain everything and give it shape. But real abandonment is quieter than that. It doesn't crash. It fades. I stayed in that garage until the morning, then got up before they could pretend to be surprised by my discomfort. I folded the blankets neatly, left the pillow where it had been placed, walked to the edge of the driveway and sat on the curb until the rideshare came. I said nothing when I left. And they didn't follow me, not even my son, the one I carried, through August heat in 1983, when my ankles swelled and I wore an old fan around my neck just to make it through the days. The one I stayed up for, night after night, when his asthma was bad, when the breathing machine filled our small hallway with a wheeze like a ghost sighing. The one I fed with food I skipped for myself because rent was due. And he needed protein more than I needed pride. The one who used to put dandelions in my coat pockets and draw hearts with Mom inside them when he couldn't yet spell. That son, I'll tell you what I did for him, all of it. But first let me sit with this. Let me sit with the hum of the refrigerator that leaked onto my makeshift bed. The echo of voices laughing about something I wasn't invited to hear. The hollow thunk of a wine bottle set down to hard on the counter. I remember it all, not because it broke me, but because it was the first time I saw the truth of my place in their story, and how far from the center I'd been moved. One night in the garage, they said, one night. But some moments are long enough to stretch across a lifetime. I used to think that love meant doing things without keeping score. You just showed up. You made the meals, cleaned the rooms, ironed the shirts. You remembered birthdays without being reminded, offered rides without being asked, and sat beside hospital beds even when your name wasn't on the emergency contact form. That's what I did. For years, for decades, after I left that garage, I went back to my apartment, the one bedroom I'd been renting since Harold passed. It smelled like lemon cleaner and cedar from the sachets I kept in my drawers. I sat at the kitchen table, still in the clothes I wore the night before, and I started writing a list. Not for revenge, not to keep receipts, just to remind myself that I had loved in ways that mattered, The list began in 1983, the year my son was born. I remember how I used to hold his foot in my hand while he slept, the little heel fitting neatly in my palm like a smooth stone, when he was 3. I went back to working nights at the pharmacy downtown. I wore white sneakers and a blue smock. And I'd come home at 6:15 every morning, just in time to pack his lunch and walk him to preschool. He always liked apples peeled, but not cut. They taste better whole, he used to say, his tiny hand gripping mine as we crossed Sycamore Street. I learned to peel them in perfect spirals. One long ribbon of skin slipping onto the paper towel. I did that every day until he started middle school. It's funny, the things your hands remember long after you've been told they're no longer needed. When he broke his arm in the 9th grade. I slept upright in the chair next to his bed for nights because he kept waking up in pain. I brought ice packs every hour, spoon-fed him soup with one hand, and managed the bills with the other. I remember folding his laundry and finding a girl's number in his jeans pocket. I never said a word, just smiled when he hummed around the house, let him feel safe in his privacy. Later, when college came, I sold my mother's old brooch, the one she wore on Sundays, and told me to save for something important. I had it appraised at Pender's down on Market Street. The man behind the counter looked sad when he handed me the check. I used it for my son's textbooks and his bus fare. Told him I had some savings put aside. I didn't, but I never let him feel the weight of what things cost. Then came the wedding, 2010. I paid for the flowers, lilies, and cream-coloured roses, and helped the caterer redo the seating chart when the groom's mother decided to change things at the last minute. I wore pale blue and didn't cry, even though the ceremony was rushed, and they forgot to save me a seat near the front. I stood at the back of the reception hall near the kitchen doors and watched them dance. I was the one who drove her to her prenatal visits when she was too nauseous to manage alone. The one who crocheted the baby blanket they still keep in the nursery, even if they don't remember who made it. I was there for the birth. Slept on a hospital bench for 2 nights, rubbing my arms to stay warm while they slept in the room upstairs. When they brought my grandson home, I stocked their fridge, did their laundry, and scrubbed their bathroom because they were too tired. I have made 3 turkeys a year for over 20 years. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the extra one in February, because he always said February felt like a long wait. I kept that tradition even when they moved across town and told me not to fuss. I drive over with tinfoil-wrapped casseroles and fresh rolls. I made a cake every year, chocolate with vanilla icing. Decorated with whatever made him smile. Trains when he was 5, soccer balls when he was 12. By the time he turned 30, it was just simple swirls. When my husband Harold died stroke, 2015, I didn't let it become their burden. I arranged the funeral, took the calls, paid off the last of his hospital bills quietly with the joint account we had saved. I kept the grief light when I visited, smiled in photos. Never stayed too long, Mom's strong, they'd say, but no one asked how I was sleeping. I showed up when they needed a babysitter, a dog sitter, a house sitter. I took care of their things without needing recognition. Watered plants. Picked up dry cleaning, mailed off their packages. I was the hand that signed cards, sent thank you notes, remembered anniversaries. I held the social fabric of this family with invisible thread, and now that thread has gone slack. There's an emptiness that follows you when you've spent your life anticipating other people's needs, an ache in the quiet when no one remembers what you've given. I don't say this with bitterness, just clarity. I gave without keeping score. But when they asked me to sleep in the garage even for one night, I realized they never kept the score either. They didn't know how much had been done for them, or worse, they knew. And it didn't matter anymore. It was always easier too. Let me be the helper, the giver, the quiet fixture in the background, the one who adjusted her schedule, gave up her room, made room, always made room. Until the room they gave me back was for concrete walls and a rusted water heater humming in the dark. I think sometimes about the way they'd laugh when I surprised them with small things, their favorite cookies, socks they'd mention needing, a new charger for their phones. They used to call me magic. You always know, Mom, you always show up. Maybe that's the problem. I always did, even when they forgot to say thank you, even when my name was left off invitations, even when I was told, gently but firmly, that this year we're just doing something small with friends. I showed up anyway. Until now, there's a difference between giving freely and being taken for granted. It took me 70 years to feel that difference in my bones. Now I do, and that knowledge sits in me like a seed, quiet and waiting, not angry, but awake after that night in the garage. The memories shifted, not in the way you forget things, but in the way a photograph changes meaning once you know what happened after it was taken. Suddenly, all the little things I had brushed off over the years began to take on weight. They had always been there, I think. I just didn't let myself see them clearly. It's strange how silence builds, not in loud moments, but in pauses. The first kind of hurt I noticed came in the form of late responses. A text that went unanswered for a week, a voicemail ignored, and then, when they did reply, it was brief, not cold, just clipped. Busy, can't talk now, will. Call soon, but soon became a month, then 2. I once mailed my grandson a book I found at a thrift store, a beautiful hardback copy of The Secret Garden, with gold-edged pages. It arrived on his 8th birthday. And I wrapped it in paper decorated with tiny foxes. I never heard anything about it, no text, no call. Months later, when I asked how he liked the story, my daughter-in-law squinted and said, "Oh, I think it's in one of the bins in the garage. He's more into tablets now." It was always small things like that. Easy to excuse, easy to say, well, times change, but something chipped away each time, a sliver of warmth gone, a little more distance inserted. They stopped asking me to stay for holidays after 2018. That year, I brought over a pumpkin pie I'd baked from scratch, the way Harold liked it. When I arrived, the table was already full. I ended up sitting on the folding chair near the laundry room, balancing my plate on my knee while my daughter-in-law's sister sat in my usual seat. She smiled at me with the vague politeness of someone who didn't know I used to burp that man when he was a baby. No one said anything directly. That's the thing. You're not pushed, you're just gently moved aside. There was a Christmas where they asked me to come a day early to help with prep. I spent 12 hours in the kitchen, dicing and baking and washing up. Then, when everyone else arrived, they acted like I was the caterer. I watched them exchange gifts while I sipped tea in the corner. They had a whole group photo taken in matching pajamas. I wasn't asked to be in it. Later, my grandson said, "You weren't in the picture, Grandma," like it was a mystery. I just smiled. Said I was tired that day. I kept telling myself it wasn't personal. People are busy. Families grow in different directions. But something in me knew better. It wasn't about busyness. It was about convenience. There were times I'd offered to take my grandson for a weekend and be told, "Oh, we already made other plans." Then I'd find out they dropped him with a neighbor or her sister, anyone but me. Not because I was dangerous, not because I did something wrong, but because, I suspect, I didn't fit the picture they wanted anymore. I was the relic. The woman with too many questions, too many stories, too many reminders of where they came from. I cooked with butter. I used a paper calendar. I watched the evening news and commented on weather patterns. I didn't scroll. I didn't vibe. They made me feel like I was always one step behind the world they were building, like I was a guest in a house I owe. Zoned. Even the photos in their home changed. Slowly, mine disappeared. At first, just one from the hallway wall, then the family portrait from Disneyland. Then the little framed one on the side table of me holding their newborn, by the time I noticed. It had been months. I stood in their living room during a visit and realized I was nowhere to be seen. The walls were covered in smiling friends, polished Instagram moments, curated perfection. And none of it included me. They didn't remove me. They just didn't remember to keep me. One time, when I caught a bad cold and texted my son that I wasn't feeling well, he replied the next day with, "Hope you're better now." That was it. No call, no check-in, no soup at the door the way I had done for him 100 times, just a vague hope in passing. I started going to the grocery store just to hear someone say my name. The cashier, Maria, knew me as Miss Mary and always commented on my scarf. I'd linger in the cereal aisle to watch young mothers with toddlers, just to remember what it felt like to be needed. Then came the isolation. The way invitations slowed, then stopped. I wasn't asked to help decorate for birthdays anymore. I wasn't told about school plays or soccer games until they were already over. It was a last-minute thing, they'd say, or it was just a small event, but I saw the pictures online. The balloons, the crowds, the smiles. And in none of them was I present. I started eating dinner earlier. Not because I was hungry, but because the days felt longer when there was nothing left to look forward to. I'd boil water at 4:30. Set a placemat, light a small candle to feel less alone. I made my meals small, simple, quiet. Sometimes I'd hear a siren outside and feel my heart leap, thinking maybe they'd call, maybe something had happened. Maybe I was still someone they'd reach for, but the phone stayed. Still, there's a kind of grief that doesn't come with funerals, a grief that comes with birthdays no one remembers, with silence on Mother's Day, with watching someone else step into the space you held and realizing no one noticed the switch. That's the grief I carried, not in sobs, but in sighs. I didn't tell anyone, not my neighbors, not my friend Diane from church. I just let it sit in my chest like an old stone, smooth from all the times I turned it over in my mind, because part of you still hopes, even then. Still waits for the door to open, the apology to come, the child to remember. But memory is selective, and silence, I've learned, is inherited. The quieter they grew, the quieter I became, until one day, it was too quiet to ignore, and that was when everything changed. There's always a moment when something you thought would last simply ends, not with thunder, but with the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. For me, it happened on a Wednesday. The mail came late that day. And I remember opening it by the sink, steam rising from a pot of soup I'd just set to boil. I wasn't expecting anything important. Most days is just coupons and flyers. But there, tucked between a real estate ad and an envelope from the electric company, was a large white document stamped with the words, "Property Transfer Notification." I read it twice before I understood, then a third time to be sure. The house, my house, the one Harold and I bought in 1992, the one with the cherry tree we planted in the backyard. The one I'd let them live in after he passed because they were starting their family and needed help. That house had been transferred to them without a word. It was written plainly, almost coldly. Legal language, neat signatures, there. Names listed as sole owners. Mine erased, struck through with a pen stroke so clean you'd think it had never been there. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because when I looked up, the soup was bubbling over, hissing against the stovetop. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had taken me out of the story entirely. That house was more than wood and walls. It was my life's work. I scrubbed those floors on my knees. I painted those shutters every 2 summers. I knew which windows. let in the golden light, and which ones jammed in the winter. I had agreed, years ago, to let them move in while I stayed in a small apartment nearby. I didn't ask for rent, I just wanted it to stay in the family. I thought we had an understanding. I thought they understood me. But when I called, and I only called once, my son answered with that same voice I had started to. Dread, flat, defensive before I even spoke. He said, "It was just a formality, Mom. The lawyer said it would simplify things. You weren't living there anymore. We thought it made sense." And then he added, "You're not mad, are you?" Not mad, that's the thing. Anger would have made it easier. Anger gives you something to push against. But what I felt was emptier than that, a hollowing. I had told myself, again and again, that the little slights didn't matter, that their busy lives weren't personal. But this wasn't busy, this wasn't forgetfulness, this was erasure, written in ink. That was the moment something in me closed. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just said, "Thank you for letting me know," and hung up. I sat with the envelope for hours, ran my fingers over the embossed seal. I knew the lawyer they'd used his office was 2 blocks from my church. He used to go to our neighborhood barbecues when the kids were little. They hadn't asked me to sign anything because I'd already placed the deed in a trust years ago when Harold died, with them listed as future beneficiaries. I hadn't thought they'd act early. I hadn't thought they'd reach for it while I was still alive. It wasn't illegal, but it was a choice, and choices tell you everything. After that, I started seeing the pattern I had refused to admit. The garage wasn't a mistake, the forgotten birthdays, the missed calls, the slow drift, none of it was accidental. It was all part of the same quiet decision that I was no longer necessary. I was an obligation to manage. I thought about how they had smiled at me when I'd brought over casseroles, how they'd let me fold their laundry while they watched TV, how I had once paid the past due balance on their heating bill without telling them, just to make sure they stayed warm that winter. And now they had taken the house, without discussion, because they believed they could, and that's what broke me. Not the paper, not the signatures, not even the loss of the home. What broke me was realizing how confident they were that I would never push back, that I would stay quiet, that I would keep loving them the same way I always had even after this. That's what betrayal really is. It's not just a wound. It's the knowledge that someone you protected believed, somewhere along the line, that they could stop protecting you. I spent the rest of that day moving slowly around my apartment. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't check the news. I just cleaned. I scrubbed the kitchen floor until the linoleum glowed. I wiped down every cabinet. I sorted my linen closet. I did all the things I used to do in that house, as if muscle memory could quiet the ache. And then I found the old metal box, the one I'd kept in the top of my closet for years. Inside was every important document I still had: birth certificates, Harold's will, insurance policies, and a card from my grandson that read, "You're the best grandma in the world," written in orange crayon. I held that card for a long time, and then I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to shout or beg. I wasn't going to ask them to explain what they had done. I was going to learn how to become very, very quiet, and in that quiet, I would begin again. Silence came easier than I expected. After the papers arrived and the call ended, I didn't slam a door or cry on the phone to a friend. I didn't even let myself raise my voice in the apartment. I just stopped speaking about them, stopped thinking aloud about what they might do next, stopped trying to guess what part of me they might take next without asking. I closed the metal box with the crayon card inside and placed it back on the top shelf of the closet. Then I made a cup of tea, sat in my chair by the window, and stared out at the neighbor's sycamore tree as the wind moved the leaves. I didn't cancel holidays or write any letters. I didn't unfriend anyone or return the key they gave me years ago, though I knew it probably didn't work anymore. I simply went quiet. I let the silence stretch long between our interactions. Let it braid itself through my days like a soft thread. I stopped reaching out. I didn't remind them when my birthday came. I didn't offer to babysit when school breaks approached. I didn't ask when they were planning their next vacation or if they needed anything from Costco. 4 years. I'd been the one to initiate sending the first message, making the first call, offering help before they could ask. I thought that's what love looked like, always showing up first, but love doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes love is learning when to sit still. When to stop knocking on a door that hasn't opened in a very long time. I began writing things down in a small blue notebook, not complaints, just facts, the date they transferred the house, the amount I paid in property taxes the year before, the date I loaned them $2. 0 for a car repair they never repaid. I didn't do it to confront them. I did it to remind myself that my memory was still whole, still sharp, that I had not imagined my generosity. When I brought the notebook with me to my first quiet appointment with a lawyer, I placed it on the table like an offering. He wore a grey tie and had soft hands. The kind of hands that looked like they had turned many pages. He listened, carefully, respectfully, and when I finished, he said something simple. You have more power than you think. I didn't tell anyone I went. I didn't make sudden moves. I kept showing up to church on Sundays. I kept making soup on Wednesdays. I read. I sorted through boxes. I began slowly converting old photo albums to digital, naming each file carefully. Herald Fishing 1987, Easter eggs _lawn 1994, Dana Fair Spike. I found a sense of order in it. I also started reading about trusts, about elder rights, about probate, and inheritance and tenancy. I didn't learn to punish, I learned to protect, to shield the rest of what I had built, however small, from being dissolved without permission. Silence, it turns out, is a discipline. When you're quiet, you begin to hear what was always there. I heard how often my phone didn't ring. I noticed how birthdays passed without candles or calls, how the world moved around me as if I'd already stepped aside. One afternoon in March, I went to the same grocery store I always did, Maria. The cashier waved like she always did. I bought 2 pears, a loaf of seeded bread, and a small wedge of cheddar. When I got home, I made myself a sandwich and ate it slowly at the table while the rain traced long streaks down the window. I was alone, but not lonely. That distinction mattered more now than it ever had. You begin to separate things that used to be tangled. Need from guilt, love from habit, presence from obligation. I didn't stop loving them. That's the thing. My silence wasn't revenge. It wasn't a tantrum. It was reverence for myself, for my time, for the version of me that had given so much and deserved not to be buried quietly under other people's comfort. I started walking in the mornings, early, before the noise. I'd take the long path around the reservoir and watch the ducks gather in the reeds. One morning, I brought a thermos of coffee and sat on a bench for an hour, just watching the light shift. No phone, no voices, just the soft sound of nature remembering me. In that space, I remembered myself. Mary Carson, 70, widow, mother, grandmother, once a pharmacy technician, once a Girl Scout troop leader, once the woman who danced barefoot in her kitchen when her favorite song came on the radio. I started dancing again, just a little, in socks, on coldwood floors, to old records Harold left behind. The silence made room for joy in strange places, and I kept saving. I adjusted my budget, stopped giving gifts, cancelled the storage unit I no longer needed, started funneling the little extra I had into a savings account with a name I typed deliberately, Next Chapter Fund. I didn't know what the next chapter would be yet, but it would be mine. And the lawyer helped me start making copies of everything. We drafted a new will, one that spoke in my voice, not theirs, one that named names with intention and love and care. I added a clause to protect certain heirlooms: my mother's brooch, my father's war medals, the quilt I had made in 1980 from my children's baby clothes, if they didn't want me. They would not take pieces of me when I was gone. It wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate. My silence became my sword, not to harm, but to draw a line, a boundary I had never known how to place before. And as I moved more quietly, I noticed how loud the world had become with wanting, but I no longer lived. In that noise, I had learned to step out of it, to choose myself. For the first time in my life, my energy belonged to me. No more casseroles left at doorsteps with no thank you, no more long drives for cold smiles, no more forgiving betrayals while calling them misunderstandings. I had nothing to prove, and everything to reclaim. I still had the photograph of us, taken when my son was 12. We were at the beach. He had sand on his nose and my sunglasses perched on his head. I used to keep it on my fridge, but now it lives in a drawer, tucked beside a dried lavender sachet and a handwritten recipe for Harold's favourite stew. I don't need to see it every day, but I also don't need to throw it away. I am learning how to hold memories without living inside them, and how to be quiet, not because I have nothing to say, but because I finally know when I deserve to be heard, and that day is coming. There wasn't a single day that marked the shift, no bold declaration, no suitcase by the door. I didn't leave anyone. I simply began returning to myself, slowly, as if brushing dust off an old mirror. Each morning became a quiet promise to do one thing differently than the day before. At first, it was small things. I started eating breakfast at the cafe on Maple instead of in my apartment. There, I was Miss Mary again, the waitress Deirdre, who wore purple glasses and remembered everyone's orders, knew I liked my egg soft and my coffee th cream. She once brought me a croissant, just because she said I looked like I needed something buttery. I smiled at that, not because of the pastry, but because it had been a long time since anyone had looked at me and seen me. I spent more time in the library. I'd sit by the window and read quietly, letting my mind stretch across pages instead of circling the same old wounds. I discovered new authors, started a little notebook where I jotted down lines that made me feel something, lines about grief, about mothers, about the quiet dignity of getting older. I wrote some of my own too, though I didn't call it poetry, just thoughts arranged gently. One Thursday morning, I joined a walking group for older women, nothing fancy, just 6 or 7 of us, mostly widows, circling the high school track and talking about anything but our children. There was comfort in that, being among people who weren't asking for pieces of you, just walking beside you. We'd stop for coffee after sometimes, talk about recipes, arthritis, old shows we missed. One of them, Gina, had the same laugh as my sister used too. She told me once, "You carry yourself like someone who used to be very loved." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said thank you. Then I went home and sat with her words like a stone in my hand. I also started going through the boxes in my closet, years of things I'd held onto just in case. I donated most of it, not because it didn't matter, but because I finally understood that meaning doesn't need to take up space. I kept only what felt essential: a few photos, Harold's watch, a sweater my grandson once fell asleep against. The rest I let go, and with each bag I dropped off, I felt lighter. I moved differently with people too, more cautious but not cold. I didn't overextend. I stopped offering things that weren't asked for. I began asking myself a simple question before every interaction: will this cost you peace? If the answer was yes, I didn't do it. That became my new compass. Peace became my currency. One day, I received an invitation to my grandson's School recital, a digital flyer forwarded with no message, no hope you can come, no we'd love to see you, just the event and time. The old me would have baked cookies, ironed my best blouse, and brought gifts. The new me simply noted the date, and when the day arrived, I went to the botanical gardens instead. I walked among the roses, read plaques about soil pH and pruning seasons, and sat on a stone bench beneath a trellis covered in wisteria. I stayed there until the sun warmed my knees and the ache in my chest loosened into something softer. Regret, maybe, or simply release. I didn't feel cruel for not going. I felt whole. I had always thought motherhood was a lifetime contract of sacrifice, but no one told me that sacrifice without acknowledgement becomes erosion. No one told me that you can disappear inside your own generosity if you're not careful. I used to give and give, believing it made me good, but now I see that goodness isn't just what you give, it's also what you protect. I started protecting myself, financially, too. I went back to the lawyer. We talked through more than just the will. We discussed asset protection, living trusts. We created clear documentation, and I appointed a different executor, not my son, a neighbor, a woman named Margaret who had brought me soup once when I twisted my ankle. She wasn't family, but she cared, quietly, steadily. That mattered more than shared DNA. I opened a second bank account, one they didn't know about. I called it my Sunset Fund. I didn't know what I'd use it for yet, only that it was mine. I also found an organization that helps older women downsize and relocate. I wasn't moving yet, but I wanted options. I wanted to know that if I ever needed to start fresh, I could. That freedom was like air in my lungs. I reconnected with my cousin Leela, who lives 2 states over. We hadn't spoken in years. But one evening, I sent her a message, just 3 words. Are you home? She called that same night. We talked for 2 hours, like we were girls again, sitting on Grandma's porch with sweet tea and stories. She told me she still had a quilt I'd made her in '87, said it still smelled like lavender. Not everyone leaves you. Some people just get quiet waiting for you to reach out again. There was also a woman in the walking group, Helen. She'd been through something similar. Her daughter stopped speaking to her after a disagreement about childcare. One day, Helen looked at me and said, "You don't do anyone in your silence." That stayed with me. I realized I wasn't just building boundaries, I was building a life, a real one. With color and rhythm and warmth, I went to see a play by myself. I wore lipstick that hadn't touched my mouth in years. I bought a single ticket in the 4th row and cried 3 times during the performance, not because it was sad, but because I remembered how good it felt to feel something that wasn't tied to them. One evening, I stood in the kitchen stirring lentils and realized I hadn't thought about the garage in weeks. The image of that cold mattress, the tricycle, the cardboard boxes, it no longer made me clench. It had dulled, faded into a lesson. Not a wound, healing, I've learned, isn't loud either. It's not a drumbeat or a ceremony. It's the slow reintroduction of your own name into your days. It's laughter with someone new. It's realizing you don't flinch at silence anymore. I don't wait for calls now. I don't check the mailbox hoping for their handwriting. I let it all be what it is. And when they do reach out, because sometimes they still do, I respond with kindness but never urgency. I no longer rearrange my life for the crumbs of their attention. I answer like I would a stranger on the street, polite, distant, whole. I haven't become hard. Just clear, and clarity, I've found, is a form of grace. I move differently now, with softness that's not naive, with strength that's not sharp. I am not the woman who slept in the garage. I am the woman who stood up, gathered her things, and walked back into the quiet, and made something beautiful there. And I'm not done yet. They didn't notice it at first. My absence, I was still polite. Still sent a holiday card, still remembered birthdays with a simple message. Still replied to the occasional text with warmth, but only warmth, nothing more. I stopped offering, stopped anticipating, stopped bending myself into shapes to make their lives easier. At first, I think they thought I was just tired, maybe going through something, maybe in a phase. That's what people say when someone they depend on begins to recede. They call it a phase because it's easier than calling it a reckoning. But over time, it became clear that something had shifted, not loud, just unmistakable. The first crack I heard about from a neighbor, their water heater broke. And they had to stay in a hotel for a weekend. Years ago, they would have called me. I had a key, I had space, I had always been their fallback, their cushion, but I wasn't asked this time. And they didn't seem to have another option lined up. That's when the silence started to feel like a mirror, reflecting back at them, not what I had taken, but what I had always quietly given. I heard, in bits and pieces, about the adjustments they had to make. My grandson's school had an early dismissal program that cost money. I used to be the one who picked him up, gave him snacks, helped with homework while dinner was prepped. Now they paid for an aftercare service that didn't always have room. They missed my steadiness, my reliability. Not in a way that they said aloud, but in the small signs of strain that began to show. The rushed grocery runs, the mismatched socks on the boys' feet in the school photo. The time they posted online that they were looking for a weekend babysitter, with flexible hours and references. Imagine that. I had been their reference for everything. I didn't gloat. That's not who I am. But I did notice. And not with joy, but with clarity. There were gaps now, spaces they had once filled with my time, my effort, my presence. And they weren't quite sure how to patch them. They tried to outsource what I had done freely, out of love. But it's hard to replace someone who knew how to fold your life around theirs without needing to be asked. There was a time when I could walk into their kitchen and know what was missing before they realize. It themselves, butter, laundry, soap, a card for the teacher's birthday. I kept lists in my head, checked calendars they didn't know I followed. Without me, those little gaps became bigger, more visible. Things slipped at Christmas. I didn't send gifts, only a card with a pressed flower inside, a gesture, not a lifeline. They called after that, my son and his wife, both on speaker, both trying a little too hard. We were just thinking of you. They said, it's been a while. I said, I hoped they were well. I asked how the boy was doing in school. I kept my voice soft, but distant. I didn't offer to visit. I didn't invite them over. I let the conversation hang in the air like something forgotten on a clothesline. And I think they felt it then, the absence of my need to belong to them. For so long, I had chased closeness. Now, I was simply living. Without them, their tone changed in later messages. More careful, a little more tender, but still unsure how to bridge the space they had helped build. And I wasn't interested in rebuilding what had already rotted. I wanted something new, something earned, and they hadn't earned it yet. I found out through a mutual friend that the house had issues, foundation cracks. Something with the gutters, a slow leak that had spread beneath the floorboards. They'd called a contractor, but it was costly, the kind of costly that keeps you up at night. Harold and I had maintained that house with sweat and patience. We knew where it creaked, where it needed coaxing. We treated it like it had a spirit of its own. You can't replace that kind of care with a service call. I thought about offering advice. Even considered passing along the name of the plumber we used to trust, but I didn't. Some things they had to learn on their own. One Saturday morning, I saw a familiar number calling and let it go to voicemail. My son's voice was softer this time. Hey, Mom, I know we haven't talked much. Just wanted to check in. If you're up for lunch sometime, I'd love to see You let me know. I listened to that message 3 times, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wanted to feel what it stirred in me. There was no apology, just a reaching. An invitation, wrapped in hesitation. I didn't call back, not out of spite, but because not every hand that reaches deserves to be held again right away. Some need to wait, some need to stretch in the stillness. Feel the discomfort of being outside the warmth they once took for granted. Let the silence do its work. I continued my routines, my walks, my reading, my growing friendships with people who didn't need my sacrifice to love me. I went to Helen's birthday brunch, helped Gina find a second-hand desk for her granddaughter. I even took a short trip with Leela 3 days on the coast, staying in a small bed and breakfast with ocean views and white sheets that smelled of lemon. We sat on the balcony in sweaters, talking about our lives. She said, "You're quieter now, but there's a strength in it." I told her it took me 70 years to learn that silence can be sacred. She nodded like she understood, because she did. What they lost without me wasn't just help or convenience. It was a presence, a pulse. I was the thread that stitched holidays together, the call that remembered anniversaries, the meal that tasted like home. And now all of that had vanished, not in anger, but in decision. They tried to recreate it in small ways. I could see it in their photos, their attempts at hosting, their new routines. But something always looked slightly out of place, a little hollow, because love that comes from service is only as strong as the gratitude behind it. And theirs had been absent for too long. I didn't need them to fall apart to feel whole. I just needed to know that I was no longer invisible, and in my absence, they finally began to see me. Not all at once, not in full, but clearly enough to feel the shape of the space I once filled, and to understand that not everything they lost could be replaced. It had been nearly a year since the night in the garage when I finally sat down to write the letter. It wasn't something I planned. I didn't light a candle or pick out special stationery. I just woke up one morning in early October, the air crisp, the sky pale with the early kind of light that feels almost forgiving, and something in me said, "Now." I made my tea, sat at the kitchen table where Harold's old radio still played, the same station, classical and soft jazz, just like he liked. I pulled out a legal pad from the drawer and clicked a pen, and without thinking too hard, I wrote at the top, "To the woman I was." It wasn't meant to be dramatic. It wasn't therapy or closure or punishment. It was a conversation, long overdue. I didn't start with the betrayal. I started with her hands. "Your hands," I wrote, "have always been gentle. You used them to brush fevered foreheads, to braid hair before school, to press sandwiches into wax paper and tuck notes beneath them." I wrote about how she carried so much without complaint, how she used silence as a shelter, even before she realized it could also be a weapon. I told her I saw her, not the mother or the wife or the helper, her, the woman underneath it all. The woman who danced in the kitchen with bare feet and a glass of cheap wine, laughing at nothing. The woman who stayed up late reading mystery novels when everyone else was asleep. The woman who once dreamed of seeing Italy, even if she never made it past Nebraska. I told her I knew how tired she was, how long she'd gone unnoticed, how she had learned to swallow her needs because someone else's were always louder, how she thought that love meant always saying yes. I thanked her. I wrote, "Thank you for showing up every day, even when they forgot to say your name. Thank you for standing still when everyone else pulled away. Thank you for staying soft." I wrote about the day she signed away the house without knowing it, about how she stood in that kitchen, paper in hand, soup boiling over, and didn't scream. Just stood there and realized she had given more than they could ever return. I wrote, "You didn't deserve that, But you handled it with grace, and grace, even when unrecognized, leaves a mark. And then I wrote what she needed to hear most. You never needed to earn love. You were always enough, even in the silence. Even when they forgot, even when they left you in the garage. I paused after that sentence. The pen hung in the air. That night in the garage had haunted me for months, not because it hurt physically, but because of what it symbolized. The cold concrete, the tricycle beside my pillow, the hum of the old freezer. That wasn't a mistake, it was a message, a final repositioning, and yet, that night had also been the beginning of my return, so I wrote, "Thank you for not staying." On that floor, "Thank you for standing up." The letter stretched on for pages. I wrote about my grandson, how I missed the sound of his little feet running through the hall, how I still remembered the way he smelled after a nap, warm and sweet like powdered sugar. I wrote about Harold, how he would have hated how things turned out, but how proud he would have been of the way I found my spine again. And I wrote about forgiveness, not the kind you hand out to absolve others, but the kind you offer to yourself, piece by piece. I forgave her for being too soft, for waiting too long, for thinking she had to earn what she'd already given. I forgave her for the years she disappeared inside other people's needs. I forgave her for the bitterness that sometimes crept in after the silence started, and when I was done, I didn't read it again. I folded it slowly, took it out to the garden behind the building. The air smelled like dry leaves and pine bark. I placed the letter in the fire pit I'd helped build with the neighbors last spring. I struck a match, watched the paper curl in on itself and turn black around the edges. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. The ashes lifted gently into the air, and I didn't cry. I just stood there, wrapped in my sweater, letting the wind brush past me like an old friend. That letter was the thing I hadn't known I needed. Not for them. For me, it gave shape to the years. It gave voice to the silence. It put my name back into my own story. And the next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I framed a picture of myself. Just me. It was taken in 1974, before the children, before the responsibilities. I'm standing on a hill in a yellow sundress, squinting into the sun, wind in my hair. I remember that day. I'd gone hiking with a friend, packed sandwiches, laughed until my sides ached. I was 21. The world felt big, but I felt bigger inside it. I put the photo on my nightstand, not as a memorial, as a reminder of the woman who once believed in her own life. Before it was swallowed by other people's timelines, I looked at that photo every morning after, not to go back, but to remember that she was still here, in me, under all the years and grief and silence, and little by little, she returned. Not loud, not sudden, but in the way I stood taller, in the way I filled my home with new music, in the way I opened the curtains wider and let the light fall on my skin. That letter wasn't closure. It was a beginning, the beginning of loving. The woman I had become, not in spite of what she lost, but because of how she rose from it. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered to myself at night, "You're home now, not in a place, in a self I had finally reclaimed. My days begin slowly now, no alarms, no rush. Just the hum of the kettle and the soft creak of old floorboards beneath my slippers." I open the blinds, let the morning light fall across the kitchen table, and sit for a moment with my hands wrapped around a warm mug. I don't check my phone first. I don't check the time. I let the day announce itself when it's ready. There's a kind of rhythm to this life I didn't know I was allowed to want. It's not marked by calendars or anyone else's schedule. It moves by feeling now, by seasons, sunlight, the shifting moods of wind. I keep a small garden on my balcony, not much, just enough to give my hands something to do. Lavender, rosemary, mint, tomatoes when it's warm enough, and marigolds just because they're cheerful. I talk to them sometimes, and they grow well for me. I think they know I'm listening to. I keep a journal now. Nothing fancy, just a simple book where I write. The kind of things I once thought I had to keep to myself, little observations, gratitudes, what the sky looked like that morning, what song played in the market. A memory that surfaced while folding towels. It's not profound, but it's mine. There are no more lists of things I must do for others, no panicked runs to the store, no dinner time is set for someone else's rival. The casseroles I make now are for me. I eat at my own pace, with a cloth, napkin and my favorite plate, and I always light a candle, even if I'm alone, especially if I'm alone, and I no longer fill the silences with explanations. There are fewer calls now, fewer texts. Occasionally, they come a holiday greeting, a question about a recipe, a picture of my grandson playing soccer. I respond with kindness. But I don't offer more than I have. I don't chase. I don't lean forward. I lean back. I let what wants to find me, and what doesn't, I let drift. There's a peace in not performing anymore, in no longer folding yourself smaller to fit the outlines others drew for you. I no longer stand at windows waiting to be remembered. I remember myself in the way I brush my hair now, in the books I finish, in the earrings I wear even when I have nowhere to go, in the soup I make slowly. Just because I like the smell it leaves in the air, sometimes I still think of the house. Not with bitterness, just a passing ache, like an old injury that reminds you it once mattered. I wonder how the cherry tree is doing, if it still blooms bright in April like it used to. I wonder if they fixed the leak beneath the floorboards. If they've learned to care for the things they were so quick to claim, but I don't dwell there. That home isn't mine anymore, not because they took it, but because I gave myself a better one made of stillness and self-respect, one where I'm not an afterthought or a utility, but a woman in full. I never moved far, just far enough to breathe without having to shrink. I walk more now, down by the reservoir, where the geese gather and children still ride bikes to fast near the water. I nod at strangers, some nod back, some don't. It doesn't matter, I carry my own welcome with me. Sometimes I sit on the bench beneath the wisteria arbor and write little postcards to myself. I write things like, "You did the brave thing," or, "You are not what they chose to forget. You are what you chose to become." I keep them in a drawer beside the tea bags, and on days when the weight returns, I pull one out and read it aloud. My voice doesn't tremble anymore when I speak of what happened, the garage, the house, the silence. It happened, I lived through it, I stood up from it, and I didn't need revenge, I needed air. And I have it now. I've started painting again. Just little things, flowers, rooftops, the curve of a teacup on a windowsill. I hang them in my hallway, not because they're good, but because they came from my hands. From a woman who learned to love quiet more than noise, solitude more than spectacle. Once I believed my worth came from what I could give. Now I know my worth just is. I didn't need to keep proving it, I only needed to stop offering it too. Those who never saw it, I see it now, in every morning I rise without rushing, in every night I sleep without waiting. In every moment I choose myself without apology. I still pray, but differently now, not for change, not for healing in others. I pray for strength to remain soft, for vision to see beauty even in what I've lost, for grace to keep growing, and sometimes I still miss the version of life I once imagined I'd have. The family dinners, the grandchildren's laughter echoing through my hallways, the sense of being woven tightly into something. That dream is a shadow now, but I've stopped trying to hold it. Instead, I hold the light I do have, a quiet home, a slow day, a full breath, a name that belongs to me again. I tend my garden, I take my walks, I hum old songs while folding towels. I write letters I never send, I live without waiting. I am not rich in visits or in noise, but I am rich in peace, and that is more than I ever thought I could claim. I wasn't angry, I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. There's a drawer in my kitchen that used to be full of other people's things, loose crayons from when my grandson visited, menus from restaurants I kept for when they dropped by, stamps for birthday cards I used to send, little fragments of a life spent orbiting other lives. That drawer is different now. These days it holds matches, a small notepad, a spool of twine, a pen with blue ink, and a folded paper with a quote I copied down months ago. It reads, "A boundary is the distance at which I can love you and still love myself." I read that again and again until it finally made sense in my bones. I still love them. Let me be clear about that. Love doesn't end just because presence does. It doesn't vanish just because a door closed. But love, I've learned, is not the same thing as access. You can care for someone deeply and still choose not to let them walk freely through your spirit with muddy shoes. I carry that lesson with me now, like a smooth stone in my pocket. It doesn't weigh me down, it reminds me. I've found that getting older isn't about getting wiser in grand, sweeping ways. It's about refining, distilling, not adding more knowledge, but subtracting everything that was noise. I know less about what people want from me, and more about what I will, and will not give, and what I give now, I give freely, with joy, on my own terms. I still give, just not from the parts of me that hurt to touch. On Tuesdays, I help the church sort food pantry items. No one expects me to stay long, but I usually do. I like the quiet order of it. The rows of cans, the folding of bags, the nods shared between. People who show up for no other reason than that they know what it's like to need something without having to explain. There's a woman there, Mrs. Anderson, who wears her late husband's fishing hat and brings an extra apple just in case someone forgot to eat. She told me once, "I come here because here, I'm not forgotten." I understood that. I carry that apple in my mind. I've started writing letters again, not to them, to people I've never met, to the woman who sat across from me on the bus once, crying quietly into her sleeve, to the mother in the store who looked tired in a way only a mother of three can, to the young man who held the elevator for me and smiled with his whole face. I don't send the letters, I keep them in a box marked witness. Because sometimes people just need someone to see them. I know what it's like to feel unseen. That's another thing I carry, not in resentment but as a kind of tender awareness. I look people in the eyes now when I speak to them. I say their names when I thank them. I let the barista tell me about her finals. I listen, because being heard, really heard, is rarer than we admit, and I've learned to hear myself too. I no longer override my own intuition in order to keep someone comfortable. I no longer shrink from my own needs. I no longer swallow my voice just to keep the peace. Peace that asks you to disappear is not peace. It is silence. It is obedience. And I no longer offer either. When I visit the botanical gardens now, I don't go to walk. I go to sit. I bring a little folding stool and my sketchbook. I draw whatever catches my eye, not well, not perfectly, but with attention. A leaf, a fence post, the curve of a bird's wing. I carry that sketchbook in my bag like a map to somewhere I've yet to arrive. One page has a note at the bottom, in my own handwriting. Beauty doesn't ask to be noticed, it just grows. I've started thinking about travel, not far, maybe the coast again. Maybe the place Harold always said we'd go but never did. I don't need a travel companion. I'm not lonely. I'm in companionship with myself now, and that's become enough. I've begun to understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself, and I am present in my life now in a way I never was before, even when it was full of people. Even when it was loud and busy and bustling with tasks, I was there in body. Yes, but not in fullness, not in wholeness. Now I am here, fully. I carry joy more easily now too, not in the way of celebration, but in the way of quiet appreciation. A cup of coffee sipped slowly, the sound of wind moving through trees, a joke told by a stranger that makes me laugh out loud before I can stop myself. No one hears it, that laugh, and that's what makes it mine. They still reach out from time to time, I respond. When I choose to, I write back when I have the space. But I do not rearrange my life for their convenience. I do not open my hands to catch what they only half offer. I let them be, and I let myself be. I've made a kind of peace with the past, not in the way of forgetting, but in the way of placing. Like finally putting a book back on the right shelf. It's there if I need to reference it, but it no longer takes up space on the table. I know who I was then, and I know who I am now. The woman who rose from the floor of a garage, quiet and uninvited, and chose without fanfare to take her life back. I don't need applause for that. I have peace, and peace is the heaviest thing I carry now. Heavy not like a burden, but like something rooted, something solid. Like knowing you are no longer waiting for the door to open because you've built your own, and it opens inward.